Rain plastered Maeve's hair to her skull as she shoved the soggy paper room key into the slot. A green light flashed. Inside, it smelled of bleached carpets and stale mints. It was the scent of absolute, pathetic freedom. She had $800 in a damp envelope, a bruised jaw, and a dead phone. She thought she had finally hit rock bottom. She didn't know rock bottom had a balcony, or that the man smoking on the other side of the frosted glass partition was currently deciding where to bury a body. Fluorescent lights buzzed in the hallway, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the beige doors. Maeve pushed into room 412, letting the heavy fire door slam shut behind her. The mechanical thud click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound she had heard in 4 years. She engaged the chain latch. Then she wedged the flimsy plastic desk chair under the handle. It wouldn't stop a determined man. Greg had kicked through solid oak before. But it would make noise. Noise bought time. She dropped her canvas duffel bag onto the ugly polyester floral bedspread. It landed with a pathetic jingle. All her worldly possessions, 2 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, a handful of underwear, a stolen burner phone, and a toothbrush. Maeve walked into the bathroom. The smell of industrial bleach and mildew hit the back of her throat. She braced her hands on the edge of the faux marble sink and leaned in to look at the mirror. She looked exactly like a woman who had spent the last 3 hours driving a stolen Honda Civic through a thunderstorm. Her wet, dark hair clung to her cheeks. The left side of her face was a mottled, blooming canvas of purple and yellow. Her lower lip was split, a jagged crust of dried maroon where Greg's signet ring had caught her. She didn't cry. The capacity for tears had evaporated somewhere around mile 40. Now, there was just a vast, yawning emptiness in her chest. She turned on the shower, not bothering to let it warm up. She stripped off her damp clothes, letting them fall in a heap on the linoleum, and stepped under the spray. The cold water shocked her system, making her gasp. But she needed it. She grabbed the tiny, paper-wrapped bar of hotel soap and scrubbed until her skin was raw. She scrubbed the smell of Greg's expensive cologne, the scent of their leather sofa, the reek of her own panic out of her pores. 20 minutes later, wrapped in a scratchy white towel, she collapsed onto the edge of the mattress. The springs groaned in protest. She stared at the blank television screen, listening to the hum of the mini-fridge. Then she heard it. A heavy, sickening thud against the adjoining wall. Maeve flinched, her entire body tensing, shoulders hiking up to her ears. Her eyes darted to the locked door, her heart hammering a frantic, bird-like rhythm against her ribs. She held her breath, waiting for the shouting, the shattering glass, the inevitable escalation. But the shouting never came. Instead, a low, resonant voice drifted through the thin drywall. It wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm. "I told you," the voice said. It was smooth, dark, and lacked any inflection of panic. "The margin of error was 0. You gave me 2%. Another voice responded, higher, reedy, leaking desperation. The words were muffled, indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone begging for their life. Maeve pulled her knees to her chest. Corporate dispute? A loan shark? It didn't matter. She had spent a third of her life managing the volatile emotions of a violent man. She recognized the cadence of a predator playing with its food. Another thud. A sharp intake of breath from the reedy voice, followed by the distinctive sound of something heavy dragging across the carpet. "Don't move," her brain whispered. "Don't breathe. Clean it up," the low voice murmured. "I want to be able to eat off this floor in 10 minutes. Maeve let out a slow, shaking breath. The wall separating room 412 from room 414 felt as thin as tissue paper. She dragged herself up, grabbed a clean t-shirt and her sweatpants, and dressed in the dark. She crawled under the stiff sheets, turning her back to the adjoining wall. She was exhausted down to the marrow of her bones. A man could be getting dismembered next door, and she honestly didn't think she had the energy to call the front desk. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic, methodical sounds of scrubbing from room 414 lull her into a fragmented, uneasy sleep. Sleep abandoned her at 2:14 a.m. Her jaw throbbed with a dull, insistent ache that radiated up into her temples. The room was suffocatingly hot. The AC unit rattled, but produced nothing more than a lukewarm wheeze. Maeve kicked off the sheets. She needed air. She padded barefoot to the sliding glass door, fighting the heavy curtains. The door was stuck on its track. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the handle with both hands, and yanked. It gave way with a loud, metallic screech that sounded like a gunshot in the dead of night. She froze, wincing, waiting for a response. Nothing. She slipped out onto the narrow concrete balcony. The rain had stopped, leaving the city air thick, humid, and smelling of wet asphalt and fast food grease. Below her, the highway was a ribbon of orange streetlights and occasional headlights. She leaned against the railing, letting the damp wind cool her flushed face. A sharp scrape, followed by a metallic click, broke the silence. Maeve turned her head. The balconies were separated by a panel of frosted safety glass, reinforced with chicken wire. It obscured details, rendering whoever was on the other side into a hazy, shifting silhouette. The cherry of a cigarette flared red, illuminating the smoke that drifted over the top of the partition. It didn't smell like cheap tobacco. It smelled earthy, rich, with a faint hint of cedar. "You're heavy-handed with doors," a voice said. Maeve stiffened. It was the low, calm voice from the wall. The predator. Her instincts screamed at her to go back inside, to lock the glass door, to hide under the bed. But the sheer, mind-numbing fatigue anchored her feet to the concrete. What was he going to do? Kill her for making noise? Greg would have. But Greg was a chaotic drunk. This man sounded like he planned his violence on a spreadsheet. "It's stuck," Maeve replied, her voice raspy, devoid of apology. The silhouette shifted. The cherry flared again. Most things in this place do. Cheap tracks, rusted bearings. Maeve stared at the frosted glass. "You sound like a contractor." A low, humorless exhale of breath that might have been a laugh. "I fix problems. The title varies." Maeve leaned her forearms on the damp railing. "Well, if you've got a wrench, the AC in 412 is basically a space heater." "I'll pass the message along to management." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant roar of a semi-truck on the highway. Maeve watched the smoke curl into the night sky. She hadn't smoked in 5 years. Greg hated the smell of it in her hair. But right now, her lungs ached for the harsh bite of nicotine. "Do you have another one of those?" she asked. The silhouette went perfectly still. "You make a habit of bumming off strangers in the middle of the night?" "I don't have habits anymore," Maeve said flatly. "I left them all in a house about 60 miles from here." A pause. Then a hand appeared around the edge of the frosted partition. The skin was tan, dusted with dark hair, the knuckles scarred but immaculately clean. Between his index and middle finger was a single unlit cigarette. Maeve hesitated. She stepped closer to the partition, reaching out. Her fingers brushed his briefly. His skin was warm, dry, and rough like pumice. She took the cigarette. "Lighter?" she asked. The hand retreated, then returned, holding a heavy, matte black Zippo. Maeve took it. It felt solid, expensive, entirely out of place at a roadside motel. She flicked it open. The flame illuminated her face, the bruised cheekbone, the split lip, The dark circles under her dead eyes. She caught a glimpse of his silhouette leaning closer to the glass. He had to be looking at her. He had to see the damage. She didn't care. She lit the cigarette, inhaled deeply, and coughed as the strong tobacco hit her unaccustomed lungs. She passed the lighter back around the glass. "Thanks. You look like you lost a fight with a freight train," the man noted softly. There was no pity in his tone, only observation. "It was a man, actually," Maeve said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "But he hit like a freight train, so I'll give you half a point." "He track you here?" "No. He thinks I'm too stupid to leave the county." Maeve leaned her head back against the brick wall. "He thinks I'm sleeping in my car at the mall." "Why tell me?" he asked. The casualness was gone from his voice. It was suddenly sharp, analytical. "Because you're a stranger, smoking on a cheap balcony at 2 a.m, Maeve said, staring out at the highway. "And because I heard you an hour ago. You've got your own messes to clean up." The silence that followed was suffocating. The air grew dense, electric. Maeve realized, a second too late, that she had just admitted to hearing whatever illicit, brutal thing he had orchestrated in room 414. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have scrambled back inside. Maeve just took another drag of her cigarette. "You have exceptional hearing," the man finally said, his tone dangerously soft. "Thin walls," Maeve countered. "Don't worry. I'm deaf, blind, and mute when it comes to other people's business. I have enough problems trying to keep my own teeth in my head." She flicked the ash over the railing. "You don't sound afraid," he observed. Maeve let out a bitter, exhausted sigh. "I'm too tired to be afraid. Fear takes energy. Right now I'm just hoping the ice machine down the hall actually works." She didn't wait for him to respond. She dropped the cigarette stub onto the concrete, crushed it under her heel, and walked back inside. She wrestled the glass door shut, locking it with a defiant snap. She didn't bother checking the peephole. She crawled back into bed, the taste of rich tobacco lingering on her tongue, and for the first time in days, her heart beat at a normal pace. 3 a.m. The throbbing in her jaw had upgraded from a dull ache to a blinding, jagged spike of pain. It felt like someone had driven a hot nail into her cheekbone. Maeve groaned, burying her face in the synthetic pillow. It didn't help. She needed ice. Desperately. She sat up, her head swimming. She grabbed the plastic faux leather ice bucket from the desk. She didn't bother changing out of her oversized band t-shirt and loose sweatpants. She slipped her bare feet into the complimentary terry-cloth hotel slippers, unlatched the deadbolt, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was silent, save for the low hum of the vending machines around the corner. The geometric pattern on the carpet, hideous interlocking brown and orange hexagons, seemed to warp and shift as she walked. She rounded the corner toward the alcove that housed the ice machine and the elevators. She stopped dead. The elevator doors were propped open with a brass luggage cart. Standing in the center of the alcove was a man roughly the size of a commercial refrigerator, wearing a poorly fitting dark suit. He had a thick neck and a flattened nose. At his feet, kneeling on the ugly carpet, was a second man. The kneeling man was pressing a thick, white hotel towel against the thigh of a third man, who was slumped against the wall, breathing in shallow, wet gasps. Blood. Dark. Thick and almost black under the fluorescent lights, was pooling on the orange hexagons. Standing over them all, leaning casually against the ice machine, was a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal vest and slacks. The sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, sprawling ink. He had dark, neatly styled hair and eyes the color of slate. He was smoking a cigarette, The rich, earthy scent of cedar filled the alcove. It was him, the predator from the balcony. Kieran. Though she didn't know his name yet, his presence commanded the space-like gravity. The giant by the elevator saw her first. His hand instantly moved inside his suit jacket. The kneeling man snapped his head up, reaching for his waistband. Maeve stood perfectly still. The plastic ice bucket dangled from her fingertips. Kieran turned his head slowly. His slate eyes locked onto her. He took her in, the messy hair, the brutalized face, the oversized shirt, the absurd hotel slippers. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features. Surprise? Amusement? It was gone before she could analyze it. He raised a single finger, an imperceptible gesture to his men. The giant's hand stopped moving. "Room 412, Kieran murmured. His voice was just as smooth, just as commanding face to face as it had been through the wall. Maeve stared at the bleeding man on the floor. He let out a low moan. She looked at the blood soaking into the carpet. She looked at the giant. Then she looked at Kieran, her brain, traumatized and rewired by years of unpredictable domestic violence, processed the threat. Greg would have screamed. Greg would have thrown the ice bucket at her head for interrupting him. Greg was a lit match in a gas station. This man? This man was a scalpel. Precise, intentional. He didn't kill for sport, he killed for a reason. And Maeve wasn't a reason. She let out a heavy, rattling sigh. "Are you going to shoot me?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly, dropping all pretense of politeness. "Because if you're not, I really need to get to that machine. My face is on fire." The giant blinked, visibly thrown by her reaction. The man applying the tourniquet paused. Kieran slowly took the cigarette from his mouth. He looked at the ice machine, then back at her. He didn't smile, but the tension in his jaw relaxed a fraction. "Victor," Kieran said, his eyes never leaving Maeve. "Step aside." The giant, Victor, looked at his boss like he had lost his mind, but he obediently shuffled to the left, giving her a narrow path. Maeve walked forward. She stepped carefully over a trailing smear of blood, her terrycloth slippers padding softly on the dry patches of carpet. She approached the ice machine. Kieran was standing less than a foot away. Up close, he was taller than she realized. Broad shoulders, a faint scent of gunpowder underneath the expensive tobacco and mint. She jammed the plastic bucket under the dispenser and pushed the silver button. The machine roared to life, violently spitting crushed ice into the bucket. The noise was deafening in the tense silence of the alcove. While the bucket filled, she risked a glance up at him. His eyes were studying her bruised face with clinical detachment. "You really didn't see anything," he said, quietly over the roar of the ice. It wasn't a question. It was an instruction. "I came for ice," Maeve replied, pulling the bucket away. "I got ice. I'm going back to bed." "Someone might come looking for you," he noted. The freight train. Maeve adjusted her grip on the freezing plastic. "Let him. I'm too tired to keep running." She turned around, carefully stepping over the blood again, and walked back down the hideous brown and orange hallway. She didn't look back. She didn't run. She just walked to room 412, slipped inside, and through the deadbolt. In the hallway, Kieran watched her door close. He took a slow drag of his cigarette, his mind working with cold, calculated precision. "Boss?" Victor grunted. She saw Jimmy. "She didn't see anything, Victor," Kieran said softly, turning his attention back to the bleeding man on the floor. "Get him in the elevator. We have a mess to clean up." He glanced one last time down the hall toward 412. "And make sure nobody goes knocking on that door." Morning dragged itself into room 412 with the dreary, grey persistence of a hangover. Maeve woke with a sharp gasp, her hand instinctively flying to her face. The ice in the plastic bucket had melted into a lukewarm puddle on the nightstand. Her cheekbone felt tight, the skin stretched to its absolute limit over a knot of swollen tissue. When she blinked, her left eye registered only a blurry, restricted tunnel of light. She peeled herself off the mattress. Every joint cracked and protested. She shuffled to the door, pressed her good eye to the peephole, and saw nothing but the ugly beige wall opposite her room. She undid the chain, removed the chair, and cracked the door open. The hallway smelled aggressively of industrial pine cleaner and bleach. The spot near the ice machine where the man had bled out was perfectly clean, save for a large, damp patch on the orange and brown carpet. A bright yellow plastic sign rested over the damp spot. Caution. Wet floor. Maeve let out a dry, rasping sound that might have been a laugh if her throat hadn't been so parched. She closed the door, splashed cold water on her face in the bathroom, and grabbed her room key. She needed coffee. She needed food. Most importantly, she needed to figure out how far $800 would get her. The motel lobby was a miserable affair. Faded travel brochures sat in a spinning wire rack. A television mounted in the corner played a morning news broadcast on mute. In the center of the room, a faux wood table held 2 industrial coffee carafes, a basket of bruised apples, and a stack of styrofoam cups. Maeve poured herself a cup of the dark, sludgy liquid. It smelled like burnt toast. She wrapped her cold hands around the thin styrofoam, letting the heat seep into her palms. You should put ice on that. Again. Maeve stiffened, coffee splashing over the rim of the cup onto her knuckles. She turned slowly. Kieran was sitting in a faded vinyl armchair in the corner of the lobby. He wore a fresh shirt, black this time, the sleeves rolled up, and dark jeans. A sleek, matte black laptop sat closed on the small table next to him, alongside a ceramic mug that definitely hadn't come from the motel's complimentary breakfast bar. He was watching her with the same detached, clinical focus he had used the night before. The ice machine was compromised, Maeve said, her voice gravelly. She didn't look away. She took a sip of the terrible coffee. It tasted like ash. The mess was handled, Kieran replied, uncrossing his long legs. Management was very understanding. I'm sure they were. Maeve walked over to the basket of fruit, picked up an apple, and inspected a massive brown bruise on its side. She put it back. Does your company always conduct business in front of the vending machines? Only when a schedule gets interrupted. Kieran leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You didn't pack your car this morning, the green Civic in the back lot. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Maeve's chest. How do you know what I drive? I know what everyone on the 4th floor drives, he stated simply. It's a liability not to. The registration on the plates doesn't match the name you used at the front desk, Sarah. Maeve gripped the styrofoam cup tighter. She had used a fake name, paying in cash for 3 nights. The fact that he knew her alias, her car, and her plates made the walls of the lobby feel incredibly close. It's my sister's car, Maeve lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kieran's gaze dropped to her trembling hands, then trailed up to the purple and black swelling around her eye. Your sister has terrible taste in vehicles, and you have a terrible poker face. If the man who did that to you is looking for the Civic, you're a sitting duck in that parking lot. He's not looking for the car. He cancelled my credit cards and my phone plan. He thinks I'll crawl back when I run out of gas money. Maeve didn't know why she was explaining this to a man who, hours ago, had stood over a bleeding body. Maybe it was the absolute exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he was the only person who had looked at her bruised face without a trace of pity. Pity was suffocating. Kieran's cold pragmatism felt like breathing room. "Will you?" he asked. "I'll drive off a bridge first." Kieran studied her for a long, silent moment. "There's a diner 2 blocks south. The food here will kill you faster than your ex-husband." He stood up, retrieving his laptop. "Don't loiter in the lobby. It makes the staff nervous." He walked past her, the faint scent of cedar and expensive soap trailing in his wake. Maeve watched his broad back disappear into the stairwell. She looked down at her burnt coffee, dumped it in the trash, and walked out into the humid morning air. The pawn shop was crammed between a failing laundromat and a boarded-up liquor store in a strip mall that smelled of stale urine and exhaust fumes. Maeve pushed the heavy glass door open. A bell jingled cheerfully, entirely at odds with the thick, suffocating atmosphere inside. The air was heavy with dust and the metallic scent of old brass, cheap electronics, and desperation. A man with a thinning comb-over and a grease-stained shirt sat behind a reinforced glass counter. He barely looked up from his phone when she approached. Maeve didn't speak. She reached into a pocket and pulled out the small, velvet box she had shoved in there before fleeing. She opened it and slid it under the arched gap in the glass. Inside sat a platinum engagement ring with a 2-carat center diamond. It was flawless. Greg had bought it to impress his business partners, not her. It was heavy, ostentatious, and snagged on everything. The pawnbroker set his phone down. He picked up a jeweler's loupe, screwed it into his eye, and pulled the ring under a harsh desk lamp. Maeve looked down at her left hand. There was a distinct, pale indentation around her ring finger, a ghost of the shackle she had worn for 4 years. The skin there was smooth and white, untouched by the sun, bordered by faint red friction marks. She rubbed her thumb over it. It felt strange to have her hand be so light. "Inclusions in the center stone," the man muttered, his voice nasal. "Bands scratched. Market's flooded with these right now." "It's flawless," Maeve said, her voice dropping an octave. "I have the GIA certificate in the box. It appraised for $22,000. The pawnbroker dropped the ring back into the box and pushed it toward her. "I'm not an insurance company, lady. I'll give you $400. Maeve's good eye narrowed. $400? Are you insane? "I'm running a business. You look like you need the cash today." $400. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shatter the glass separating them, but the exhaustion anchored her. She had $800. $400 meant gas, food, and maybe a burner phone charger. It meant another few days of breathing. $500, she croaked. The man sighed, opened a cash drawer, and slid 5 crisp $100 bills under the glass. "Sign the ledger." 10 minutes later, Maeve was sitting in the stifling heat of the stolen Civic. She had stopped at a convenience store, purchasing a cheap charging cable and a bottle of ibuprofen. She plugged the burner phone, a prepaid brick she had bought months ago, and hidden in the bathroom vent, into the car's cigarette lighter. The screen flickered to life. The harsh white glare illuminated the cramped interior of the car. It took 2 minutes for the network to connect. When it did, the phone began to vibrate violently in her palm. 27 missed calls, 14 unread messages. They were all from an unknown number. Greg was smart enough not to use his own phone. Maeve's throat closed up. The air in the car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Her fingers trembled as she opened the voicemail inbox. She tapped the most recent message, bringing the phone to her ear. Static. Then the unmistakable sound of a lighter flicking. A heavy exhale of smoke. "You took the Civic," Greg's voice crackled through the cheap speaker. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a scream. It was a low, conversational murmur, which was infinitely worse. When Greg screamed, he was just blowing off steam. When he whispered, he was making a plan. Stupid Maeve. The registration is in the glove box. I reported it stolen an hour ago. Every cop in the state has those plates. You can't use the cards. You can't use the car. You're going to get tired. And when you do, I'm going to find you. And I am going to break every single bone in your face. Call me back. The message ended. A wave of nausea crashed over her. She threw the phone onto the passenger seat and opened the car door, leaning out to dry heave onto the sun-baked asphalt. Her vision tunneled. Her chest heaved, pulling in jagged, inadequate breaths. He reported it stolen. She was driving a stolen car. She slammed the door shut, threw the car into drive, and sped back to the motel. She parked in the alleyway behind the dumpsters, praying it was out of sight from the street. When she finally made it back to room 412, she was drenched in a cold sweat. She locked the door, wedged the chair under the handle, and collapsed against the wall. The walls were closing in. The beige wallpaper seemed to pulse. She crawled out onto the balcony, desperate for air. The late afternoon sun was baking the concrete, but she didn't care. She sat on the rough surface, pulling her knees to her chest, resting her forehead on her arms. Her breathing was ragged, a pathetic, broken rhythm. You sound like a cornered rabbit. Maeve squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't lift her head. Through the frosted wire mesh partition, she could hear the clink of ice against glass. Kieran. Of course he was there. "I'm fine," Maeve wheezed, her voice shaking violently. "You're hyperventilating." His calm, baritone voice drifted over the glass. "Your heart rate is erratic. You're exhibiting classic physiological signs of acute panic." "Thank you, doctor," she snapped, lifting her head. The movement made the parking lot spin. "I just found out my husband reported my car stolen. I'm trapped here." A brief pause. "The green Civic?" "Yes." "Then you made a mistake parking it behind the dumpsters," Kieran noted. "It draws attention. Cops look in alleys. They don't look in rows of 50 identical commuter cars." Maeve let her head thunk back against the brick wall. "I'm going to throw up. Breathe through your nose. 4 seconds in, hold for 4, exhale for 6. She ignored him, pulling her hair in frustration. "You don't understand. He's coming. He's going to find me." He whispered on the voicemail. "When he whispers..." She choked on the words, the memory of his signet ring connecting with her cheekbone flashing behind her eyes. On the other side of the partition, the silhouette shifted. Kieran stepped right up to the frosted glass. He didn't try to comfort her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. "Fear is a liability," Kieran said, his tone devoid of empathy, yet grounding in its sheer solidness. "It makes you reactive. You're panicking because you're looking at the entirety of your problem. Stop looking at the forest. Look at the tree in front of you." Maeve wiped a mix of sweat and tears from her unbruised cheek. "And what tree is that?" "You're not in the car. You're in a room. You have cash. $500. Good. You have a locked door. You have a geographical advantage until he actually locates you. The threat is not in the room. The threat is abstract. You are wasting adrenaline on an abstract concept." Maeve stared at the blurry shape of him through the glass. "You sound like a sociopath. I sound like someone who is still alive," Kieran countered smoothly. "Go inside. Drink a glass of water. Stop acting like prey, Sarah." He walked away from the partition. Maeve heard the sliding glass door of room 414 click shut. She sat on the concrete for another 10 minutes. Slowly, the erratic hammering in her chest began to subside. He was right about one thing. Panicking was exhausting. She dragged herself up, went inside, and drank a glass of tap water. She didn't know what to do next. But for the moment, she was breathing. Night fell over the highway, transforming the traffic into a continuous stream of white and red light. Maeve sat cross-legged on the floral bedspread in the dark, the burner phone resting on the mattress beside her. She hadn't turned the television on. She just listened to the hum of the broken AC and the occasional rattle of a semi-truck passing by. It was 11:45 p.m. She had formulated a pathetic excuse for a plan. Wait until dawn, take a cab to the nearest bus station, and buy a ticket as far west as her $500 would take her. Leave the stolen car in the lot. It was a weak plan, full of holes, but it was all she had. Click. Maeve froze. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a subtle, metallic scrape, followed by a soft snick at her front door. It sounded like someone slowly testing the doorknob. She held her breath, staring at the sliver of light beneath the door. A shadow broke the beam of light. Someone was standing right outside. Her heart vaulted into her throat. She slowly, silently slid off the mattress. Her bare feet touched the carpet. Jiggle. The doorknob turned, stopping abruptly against the deadbolt. "Come on, sweetheart," a voice muttered from the hallway. It was muffled through the cheap wood, but she heard it clearly. It wasn't Greg. The voice was raspy, nasal, and completely unfamiliar. "I know you're in there, Maeve," the voice cooed. "Greggy boy gave me the plate numbers. Saw that little green Honda tucked behind the trash cans. Clever girl, but not clever enough." Maeve's blood ran cold. He hired someone, a tracker, a bounty hunter, some low-life buddy from his poker games. Greg hadn't even bothered to come himself. He had outsourced her capture. There was a metallic scratching sound, a lockpick. Maeve's paralysis broke. She looked wildly around the room for a weapon, the heavy ceramic lamp on the nightstand. She lunged for it, ripping the cord from the wall outlet in one violent motion. She gripped the cold ceramic neck with both hands, stepping to the side of the door, her back pressed flat against the wall. "Just make this easy, Maeve," the nasal voice continued, accompanied by the persistent scratching of the pick. "He just wants his property back. You come out quiet, I get my $1,000 and nobody gets hurt." The deadbolt gave a heavy, sickening clack. He had unlocked it. The only thing holding the door shut now was the flimsy chain and the plastic desk chair wedged under the handle. Maeve raised the lamp high above her head, her muscles screaming with tension. She squeezed her eyes shut. If he steps through, swing for the temple. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. There was a muffled gasp in the hallway. Not a scream, just a sharp, wet intake of air. Then, a dull, heavy thud against the door, rattling the frame. The shadow blocking the light underneath vanished. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Maeve stood frozen, her arms shaking violently under the weight of the lamp. Seconds ticked by, agonizing and slow. She didn't move. She barely breathed. A sharp, authoritative double tap sounded on the wood. "Open the door!" It was Kieran. Maeve lowered the lamp slowly, her hands slick with cold sweat. She leaned forward, pressing her good eye to the peephole. The view was partially distorted by the fisheye lens, but she could see clearly enough. The man who had been picking her lock, a wiry, rat-faced guy in a cheap leather jacket, was slumped unconscious against the opposite wall. Standing over him, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white shirt, was Kieran. Victor, the giant from the night before, was standing a few feet away, holding a slim leather sap. "Open the door, Maeve," Kieran repeated, his voice low enough not to carry down the hall, but demanding enough to brook no argument. She dropped the lamp onto the bed. Her hands were shaking so badly she fumbled with the chain latch twice before sliding it free. She moved the chair and cracked the door open. Kieran looked at her through the gap. His slate eyes swept over her pale, terrified face, dropping to her trembling hands. There was no pity, only a chilling, calculating assessment. Your problem just became my problem, Kieran stated quietly. Maeve looked past him to the unconscious man on the carpet. He found the car. Greg sent him. I know. He's a local skip tracer. Bottom of the barrel. Kieran glanced down at the man with utter disdain. He was loud. He was sloppy. He brought a lockpick to a door on my floor. Victor grunted, nudging the unconscious man with the toe of his heavy boot. What do you want to do with him, boss? Toss him in the alley? No. If we leave him, he wakes up and calls the husband. Then we have a furious domestic abuser causing a scene in our perimeter. Kieran didn't even look at Victor. His eyes remained locked on Maeve. Zip-tie him. Put him in the trunk of his own car. Drive it to the impound lot across town and lose the keys. On it, Victor mumbled, stooping down to effortlessly hoist the wiry man over his massive shoulder like a sack of laundry. He lumbered down the hallway, leaving Maeve and Kieran alone. Maeve leaned her forehead against the edge of the door. The adrenaline crash was imminent. She could feel her knees buckling. "Thank you," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you," Kieran said flatly. "I did it because I am conducting sensitive negotiations in room 414 tomorrow, and I cannot have a domestic dispute drawing local law enforcement to this floor." Maeve let out a pathetic, breathy laugh. "Right, of course. Just maintaining the perimeter." "Exactly." Kieran took a step closer, pushing the door open a few inches wider. "Your room is compromised. If this idiot found you, it's only a matter of time before the husband realizes his scout went missing and comes himself." "I'll leave," Maeve said, turning to grab her duffel bag. "I'll go now. To where? You have no car, $500, and you look like you're going to pass out in the next 30 seconds. Maeve stopped, gripping the canvas strap of her bag. She hated that he was right. She hated the helpless, hollow feeling in her gut. She slowly turned back to face him, defensive anger flaring through her exhaustion. "Then what do you suggest?" "I sit here and wait for Greg." Kieran looked at her. Really looked at her. He took in the defiant set of her jaw, the defensive posture, the sheer, stubborn will keeping her upright despite the physical and emotional trauma radiating off her. A strange, micro-expression shifted the hard lines of his face. A flicker of genuine, albeit clinical, intrigue. "Grab your bag," Kieran ordered softly. Maeve frowned. "Why?" "Because you're a liability out here." He stepped back, gesturing down the hall with a slight tilt of his head. "Room 414 is a suite. The bedroom has a lock. You're going to sleep there tonight." Maeve's grip on the door tightened. "You want me to move into the room where I heard you, where I know what you do?" "I am offering you a secure door, Maeve," Kieran said, his tone perfectly level, showing no offense at her hesitation. "The man looking for you wants to break your bones. The men who work for me don't care that you exist, provided you stay out of the way. Make a tactical choice." She looked down the dark, cheap hallway. She looked at her broken, claustrophobic room. Then she looked at the impeccably dressed, entirely lethal man standing in front of her. It was a terrible choice, a choice between a chaotic monster she knew and a calculated monster she didn't. Maeve swallowed the dry lump in her throat. She slung the canvas duffel bag over her shoulder, stepped out of room 412, and walked toward his door. Room 414 was not a standard motel room. It was 2 adjoining suites that had been gut-renovated with aggressive, sterile efficiency. The heavy, lingering smells of bleach and despair from Maeve's side of the wall were completely absent here. Instead, the air was heavily conditioned and smelled faintly of gun oil, roasted espresso, and the sharp, clean scent of high-end dry cleaning. Maeve stood awkwardly near the entryway, the strap of her canvas bag biting into her collarbone. The living area was stripped of the motel's standard, garish furniture. In its place were 2 folding aluminum tables covered in blueprints, several stacked pelican cases, and a portable money counter. 3 men in dark clothing sat around the perimeter, their eyes tracking her with the detached, predatory interest of wolves watching a stray dog wander into their den. Victor was leaning against the far wall, casually unwrapping a roll of medical gauze. Kieran bypassed them all. He walked to the small kitchenette, picked up a bottle of mineral water, and unscrewed the cap. He didn't offer her one. "The bedroom on the left," Kieran said, gesturing with the bottle toward a solid core wooden door. "It has no windows. The ventilation grate is secured. The lock is a deadbolt, reinforced. You go in, you lock it, and you do not come out until I knock twice and say your name. Understood?" Maeve looked at the heavy door, then back at the men. This was insane. She was standing in the nerve center of a criminal enterprise, surrounded by men who killed people in hallways, and she felt an absurd, heavy blanket of relief settle over her shoulders. "What about the guy you put in the trunk?" Maeve asked, her voice rasping. "If Greg doesn't hear from him, he won't hear from him. And if he comes looking, he finds an empty room 412. He assumes his scout missed you." Kieran took a slow drink of the water, his slate eyes pinning hers. "You are safe for the next 6 hours. I suggest you sleep. You look like a corpse." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. Maeve didn't argue. She walked past the men, feeling the weight of their silent stares, and opened the door to the left bedroom. She stepped inside and through the deadbolt. The clack of the heavy metal sliding into place echoed in the small, windowless space. It was dark, lit only by a small bedside lamp. The bed was large and stripped of the ugly floral spread, made up with crisp, high-thread count white sheets that had clearly been brought in from elsewhere. She dropped her bag onto the floor. She didn't bother taking off her shoes. She crawled to the center of the mattress, curled into a tight, defensive ball, and closed her eyes. The absurdity of it all should have kept her awake. She was sleeping in a Mafia boss's staging room. Yet the profound, ironclad certainty that no one, not Greg, not a tracker, not a cop, was getting through that front door without Kieran's permission acted as a powerful sedative. For the first time in 4 years, she didn't have to listen for the sound of tires crunching on gravel. She didn't have to analyze the heavy footfalls on the stairs to gauge a man's level of intoxication. She was guarded by a monster, which meant the smaller monsters couldn't touch her. Maeve sank into a heavy, dreamless sleep. She woke with a violent jolt. The room was pitch black. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, her body instantly flooded with adrenaline. She held her breath, listening. Knock. Knock. "Maeve," Kieran's voice, low, muffled through the solid wood, completely devoid of urgency. She exhaled a shaky breath, rolling off the mattress. Her joints popped, stiff from the deep sleep and the lingering trauma of her beating. Her cheek throbbed, a dull, pulsing ache that radiated into her teeth. She unlocked the door and pulled it open. The main suite was transformed. The aluminum tables were gone. The pelican cases were gone. The room was immaculately clean, smelling heavily of chemical deodorizer. Only Kieran remained. He was sitting in a leather armchair, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, a dark tie resting perfectly against a crisp white shirt. He looked like a Wall Street executive, save for the matte black Sig Sauer resting casually on his thigh. He was checking his watch. It was a heavy, silver chronograph. "It's 6 a.m., Kieran stated, not looking up. "My associates are bringing a vehicle around to the loading dock in 10 minutes. They will drive you to the Greyhound station downtown. You'll have enough time to buy a ticket to wherever you want before the morning rush hour begins. Maeve blinked against the harsh fluorescent light of the main room. You're kicking me out. I am relocating a civilian from a volatile operational zone, he corrected, finally looking at her. My business here commences in 30 minutes. The men arriving for this meeting are not as polite as I am. You cannot be here. He stood up, holstering the weapon beneath his suit jacket in one fluid, practiced motion. He reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a thick, white envelope. He tossed it onto the empty kitchenette counter. It landed with a heavy smack. There's $5,000 in there, Kieran said. Used non-sequential 20s and 50s. It will not be flagged. Maeve stared at the envelope. $5,000. It was more money than she had seen in her own name since she married Greg. It was freedom. It was a deposit on a cheap apartment, a burner phone, months of groceries. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. I'm nothing to you. I'm a liability. You said it yourself. Kieran walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. He didn't look back at her. His broad shoulders were tense, the lines of his suit immaculate. Because I despise men who hit women, Kieran said softly, the chill in his voice dropping the temperature in the room. It shows a fundamental lack of discipline. And because you didn't scream when you saw the blood by the ice machine. You have good instincts, Maeve. Use them to stay dead. He opened the door. Victor is waiting in the stairwell. Go. The back stairwell smelled of old cigarette smoke and concrete dust. Victor stood by the heavy metal fire door at the bottom of the landing, a massive, immovable silhouette in the dim emergency lighting. Maeve descended the concrete steps slowly, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, the thick white envelope burning a hole in the pocket of her sweatpants. Morning, Victor grunted, pushing the heavy fire door open. Car's right outside, engines running. Thank you, Maeve whispered. She stepped through the door, the humid, heavy morning air hitting her face. The sky was the bruised purple of early dawn. A black SUV idled by the loading dock, its tinted windows obscuring the interior. Freedom was 10 feet away. She took a step forward. Then she heard the crunch of gravel. It wasn't a tactical, measured footstep. It was a heavy, sloppy stagger. Maeve froze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The air suddenly smelled of stale whiskey, cheap mints, and sour sweat. It was a scent permanently hardwired into her amygdala. Well, well, well. The voice slurred slightly, echoing off the brick walls of the alleyway. Greg stepped out from behind a rusted industrial dumpster. He looked terrible. His blonde hair was greasy and matted to his forehead. His designer polo shirt was wrinkled, stained with something dark near the collar. His eyes were bloodshot, manic, darting between Maeve, Victor, and the idling SUV. In his right hand, he held a heavy steel tire iron. I knew that idiot skip tracer was useless, Greg spat, taking a step closer. He pointed the iron at her. Took me 4 hours to drive down here after he stopped answering his phone. Saw the Civic. Found out you didn't check out of your room. But 412 is empty. He sneered, his eyes dropping to the thick envelope jutting from her pocket. Whose car is this, Maeve? Who are you whoring yourself out to now? Panic, cold and absolute, seized her throat. Her vision tunneled. The bruises on her face throbbed in phantom sympathy. She took a step back, bumping into the heavy fire door. Victor stepped forward, placing his massive frame between Maeve and Greg. Buddy, Victor rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. You've taken a wrong turn. Turn around and walk away. Greg let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. I'm not talking to you, you overgrown gorilla. I'm talking to my wife. Move. Not happening, Victor said, his hand sliding casually beneath his jacket. Greg didn't see the danger. He only saw an obstacle between him and his property. He tightened his grip on the tire iron. "Maeve, get over here, now, before I make what I did to your face look like a paper cut." Maeve looked at him. Really looked at him. Stripped of the expensive house, the country club memberships, and the carefully curated social image, Greg was just a sweaty, pathetic man standing in an alley smelling of garbage. For 4 years, he had been the apex predator of her world. He had controlled her finances, her friendships, her access to the outside world. He had convinced her she was small, stupid, and utterly dependent on him. But looking at him now, juxtaposed against the cold, disciplined violence she had witnessed upstairs, Greg wasn't terrifying. He was just loud. He was a tantrum in a meat suit. "No," Maeve said. The word was quiet, but it hung in the humid air like a physical object. Greg stopped. His face went slack with shock, the blood draining from his blotchy cheeks. "What did you say to me?" "I said no, Greg." Maeve stepped out from behind Victor. Her legs were shaking, but she forced her spine straight. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You're pathetic." The shock on Greg's face warped instantly into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He let out a wordless roar, raising the tire iron, and lunged forward. He didn't aim for Victor. He bypassed the giant entirely, fueled by an obsessive, single-minded need to punish his wife for defying him. Victor moved to intercept, drawing his weapon. But the heavy fire door suddenly swung open behind Maeve, smashing violently into Victor's shoulder. The giant stumbled, his shot going wide into the brick wall with a deafening crack. Greg tackled Maeve to the asphalt. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her head cracked against the rough ground, sending a spray of white-hot stars across her vision. The tire iron clattered away, rolling under the SUV. Greg straddled her, his heavy knees pinning her arms to her sides. He smelled like vomit and cheap alcohol. He wrapped his hands around her throat, his thumbs digging ruthlessly into her windpipe. "You stupid bitch!" he screamed, spittle flying onto her face. "You think you can leave me? You think you're better than me?" Maeve couldn't breathe. The pressure was immense. Her lungs burned, begging for air. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, but the paralyzing fear was gone, replaced by a feral, burning need to survive. She bucked her hips wildly, trying to throw him off. She twisted her neck, managing to slip her right arm free from under his knee. She didn't go for his hands. She reached up and drove her thumb directly into his left eye. Greg shrieked, a high-pitched, agonizing sound. He recoiled, his grip on her throat breaking. Maeve gasped, sucking in a ragged breath of humid air. She rolled onto her side, frantically scrambling toward the brick wall. "I'll kill you!" Greg howled, clutching his eye. He scrambled to his feet, pulling a small silver folding knife from his pocket. He flicked it open, the blade catching the dim morning light. He lunged for her again. Phut! A sound like a heavy book dropping onto a carpeted floor. Greg's forward momentum vanished. He pitched forward, his right knee buckling violently under his weight. He hit the asphalt face first with a sickening crunch, the folding knife skittering away into the gutter. He grabbed his leg, screaming in pure, unadulterated agony. A dark pool of blood began to rapidly expand across the grey denim of his jeans, just above the kneecap. Maeve pressed herself against the brick wall, her chest heaving, coughing violently as air rushed back into her bruised trachea. She looked up. Kieran was standing in the doorway of the stairwell. He held a silenced pistol in his right hand, the barrel still pointed at the ground, where Greg lay thrashing. His face was entirely devoid of emotion. His suit was still perfectly pressed. He looked at Greg the way one might look at a cockroach that had scurried across a dining table. Victor was already moving, securing the alleyway, scanning the nearby street for witnesses to the silenced gunshot. "I warned you about the margin of error," Kieran said softly, his voice cutting through Greg's hysterical screaming. He stepped out into the alley, his polished leather shoes crunching softly on the gravel. He walked over to where Greg was writhing on the ground. Greg was sobbing now. The violent, enraged monster had evaporated, leaving behind a whimpering, terrified child. He clutched his shattered knee, his hands slick with his own blood, tears streaming down his face, washing away the dirt and sweat. "Please," Greg blubbered, looking up at Kieran. "Please, God, don't. It's a misunderstanding. She's my wife." Kieran didn't reply. He stared down at Greg for a long, agonizing moment. He analyzed the man's pathetic, shattered state. He looked at the tears, the snot running from his nose, the trembling, bloody hands. "A man is defined by what he controls," Kieran said, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "You couldn't even control your own temper. You chased a woman across state lines because your fragile ego couldn't handle the fact that she realized you are nothing." Kieran casually raised the pistol, aiming it directly at the center of Greg's forehead. Greg froze. His breath hitched. A dark stain began to spread across the front of his khakis as his bladder let go. No, wait. I have money. I can pay you." "I have money," Kieran replied flatly. He placed his finger on the trigger. "Wait." The word tore from Maeve's throat, ragged and hoarse. Kieran paused. He didn't lower the gun, but he shifted his gaze to her. Maeve pushed herself off the brick wall. Her legs felt like lead. Her throat was on fire. She slowly walked toward them, stopping a few feet away from Greg. Greg looked up at her, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "Maeve, tell him. Tell him who I am. Tell him to let me go." Maeve stared down at the man she had promised to spend her life with. She remembered the charming smiles, the expensive dinners, the slow, insidious isolation. She remembered the first time he hit her, the apologies, the flowers. She remembered the thousands of hours she had spent shrinking herself down, trying not to take up space, trying not to trigger the bomb. She looked at him, bleeding in the dirt, smelling of urine and fear, begging for his life. She felt no pity. She felt no lingering love. She didn't even feel anger anymore. She felt absolutely nothing. He was just a stranger. "Who are you?" Maeve asked quietly. Greg blinked, confusion cutting through his panic. "What?" "Maeve, it's me. It's Greg." "I don't know a Greg," Maeve said, her voice steadying. She looked up at Kieran. Her eyes were clear, hardened by the anvil of the last 24 hours. "I've never seen this man before in my life." Kieran held her gaze. The corner of his mouth twitched, a millimeter of movement that might have been the ghost of a smile. He understood perfectly. She wasn't saving Greg. She was stripping him of the only thing he cared about, his ownership over her. She was erasing him from her narrative. "Is that so?" Kieran murmured. "Yes," Maeve said. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the thick white envelope. She held it tightly in her hand. Victor said the car was waiting. Kieran slowly lowered the pistol. He didn't holster it. He kept it by his side. "Victor, put this trash in the trunk of his car. Take it to the quarry outside of city limits. Make sure he understands that if he ever says the name Maeve again, I won't aim for the knee." Victor nodded grimly. He reached down, grabbing Greg by the collar of his ruined polo shirt, and hauled him off the ground with a sickening jerk that pulled a fresh scream from the wounded man. Kieran turned to Maeve. The pale light of the morning sun caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked at the fresh bruises forming on her neck, the dirt on her cheek, the fierce, uncompromising light in her eyes. "The bus station is west," Kieran said, gesturing toward the idling black SUV. "You have $5,000. You have no husband. The margin of error is entirely up to you now." "What about you?" Maeve asked, her voice quiet. "Your meeting? I have messes to clean up," Kieran replied smoothly, "and I prefer to do it without civilians in the perimeter." Maeve nodded once. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back at Greg, who was being shoved brutally into the back of a sedan further down the alley. She walked to the black SUV, opened the rear door, and climbed inside. The leather seats were cool and smelled of expensive detailing spray. She rolled down the window just as the driver put the car in gear. Kieran was standing in the alleyway, watching her. He raised a hand, pressing a single finger to his lips in a silent gesture. "Keep the secret." Maeve met his slate-grey eyes one last time. She didn't nod. She just slowly rolled the tinted window back up, sealing herself in the quiet, air-conditioned cabin. The SUV pulled away from the loading dock, turning onto the rain-slicked streets of the city. The sun was fully cresting the horizon now, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. Maeve leaned her head back against the headrest. Her throat ached, her ribs bruised. But as she watched the cheap motel disappear in the rearview mirror, she realized she couldn't feel the weight of the phantom ring on her finger anymore. She opened the white envelope, staring at the thick stack of bills. She was bruised. She was alone. She was technically an accomplice to multiple felonies. She had never felt more alive. If Maeve's harrowing escape and her chilling encounter with the man next door kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. This story proves that sometimes the darkest paths are the only way out of a toxic cage. What would you have done in Maeve's shoes? Would you have taken Kieran's money and run, or made a different choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow dark romance and thriller fans, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, grounded storytelling.